What's up, board fam? Eric here, and today we need to talk about Eric July because he posted a long tweet reflecting on the comic book industry, politics and comics, and how his perspective has changed now that he's actually had more experience moving through that world as a creator and a businessman. And I'm not gonna lie, this tweet stood out to me because if you know Eric July, then you know he spent a lot of time, building his audience off of criticizing the left, criticizing woke politics, framing comic book industry as heavily biased, movies, TV shows as a hostile space for people who are not left-leaning. So when I saw this post, what caught my eye is that he seems to be walking some of that back. Not completely, he's still Eric July, young Rippa, so I'm not going to get carried away, but he definitely sounds more cautious, a bit more measured, and maybe a lot more willing to admit the reality may be more complicated than the rhetoric. And this is really interesting considering who he hangs around. So what I want to do in this video is to go through the tweet piece by piece, read it exactly as he has written it, and then stop along the way to break down what I think he's really saying, giving my own personal opinion, because to me, this is either a genuine moment of growth or a businessman who's realized that reality is harder to simplify than a culture war rant, like all the stuff that he sees going on with the erotic and these other guys. I don't know, it might be both. So let's get into it. The success of the Rippaverse has given me a lot of insight and perspective that I simply didn't have before. From the time I was a kid up until around 2021, my perspective on the comic book industry was almost entirely that of a fan. My understanding of the internal politics of the industry largely came from secondhand accounts, things shared by creators, reporters, and commentary online. I'm going to pause here. Right out of the gate, this is actually a bigger admission than I think some of his audience may want to admit. Because what he's saying here is that for most of his life, and even up until relatively recently, his understanding, this is important, of the comic book industry came from the outside looking in. And this is one of my biggest complaints about Eric July and everybody else in this space is they are outsiders acting like they have some sort of internal knowledge that makes them experts on things. And I'm going to be real here, that would not be a huge deal if he were just some random fan with opinions. But Eric has built content and commentary around all these narratives. He spoke about this stuff very confidently, and that's important. You think about people like Nerdrotic and Critical Drinker and Ryan Kennel and all these other guys, they speak very confidently. So for him to now say, actually, a lot of what I understood came from secondhand accounts, it's giving, I may have been talking a little too spicy for somebody who was not actually in the room with everybody else. And listen, that is not illegal, but it is funny when people go from sounding very certain and confident to suddenly being like, well, to be fair, actually, I was mostly going off what I heard. All right, let's continue. But over the last few years, through business and meetings, mutuals in the industry, and time spent on the convention circuit, I've had the opportunity to meet, interact with, and even do business with countless publishers, writers, artists, and other professionals working in the comic book, comics and entertainment. Now, here's where the shift starts, because once you stop talking about the industry like it's one giant political boogeyman, you actually start meeting like real fucking people and having real fucking conversations. You're doing business and you're existing in those spaces face to face, and things tend to get more nuanced. And this is something that I've said over and over and over again, that this online space, the culture war stuff that happens here on YouTube and on social media is not real life. And I wish people would stop taking it that way because it's absolutely stupid. It's annoying and it's frustrating. And this is just how life actually works. It's very easy to imagine this entire field as some monolithic enemy where your main access to it is just online discourse. It gets a lot harder for him or anybody in the space to hold on to that same level of certainty once you are actually out there interacting with real people, with individuals, not just fake accounts on social media. So it turns out when you log off and go outside, human beings start acting like human beings. Crazy how that works. Not him discovering that the left is actually not just one giant hive mind. Oh my God. And that experience has given me a few big takeaways. Number one, yes, there is a political bias in the industry. From what I've seen, it does generally lean left. Many of the people who don't share that perspective tend to keep their views private, likely for the sake of job security. Meanwhile, those who feel comfortable speaking openly about their politics often lean in that direction. That said, the level of persecution I initially imagined doesn't seem to be as widespread as I once believed, at least not in my direct interactions with creators and publishers. Oh my goodness. My personal theory is that once someone reaches a level of creative success or independence, they gain a degree of insulation from political consequences, slightly at the least. Now, this section is very important because this is where Eric is still trying to hold on to the core of his worldview while admitting reality has not matched the most extreme version of that worldview that he has. He still says the industry leans left. Okay, sure, fine, whatever. A lot of entertainment spaces do lean left culturally and socially. That's not really some shocking revelation. I wouldn't even totally disagree with him. But the key line is, the level of persecution I initially imagined doesn't seem to be as widespread as I once believed. That is the real headline to me in this whole segment. Because a lot of the young Ripa Eric July branding has leaned into the idea that the left-leaning people in these spaces are aggressively punishing dissent on the right, shutting people out, pushing people away, and creating this environment of ideological persecution. And now he's saying maybe that was overstated. So basically, yes, the industry leans left, but quite possibly, maybe it's not the full-blown authoritarian nightmare that he has painted as a narrative to put into the head of his viewers. And I'm sorry, regardless of what the people in his comment section might believe, this is a meaningful walkback of that stance. It's not just a tiny detail. It's a very big deal. I also want to touch on the part where he says that maybe success insulates people from consequences. And, to be fair, there is truth to that. If you have your own audience, your own money, your own business, your own platform, then yes, you're going to have more freedom than somebody who is dependent on gatekeepers for any business opportunities or, checks you might be getting out there. But I also think that point can be a little bit self-serving, because if people treat you differently now that you have clout, that does not automatically prove that his older assumptions were correct, like the stuff he believed before. It may just mean that his position has changed. Yes, successful people often get more grace. That's not necessarily proof of persecution. Sometimes it's just how status works in literally every industry that people work in. And that's fine. I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. I don't think you have to agree with it or, co-sign on it for it to be a thing. You just have to understand that it does exist, and then you have to navigate the world knowing how that works. Anyway, let's continue. Number 2, my personal interactions with industry professionals have been overwhelmingly positive, especially in person. I've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of well-known and accomplished creators and decision makers in publishing, and nearly every interaction has been respectful. Oh, imagine that. Many have even expressed that they wish me success and are rooting for in what we're building. In fact, the only negative interactions I've had with an actual professional in the industry came from a situation where I somewhat naively went to bat for someone else. Even then, we eventually had a conversation and cleared things up. Now, I'm not naive enough to believe the industry doesn't have its share of politics or pettiness behind the scenes. Every entertainment industry is catty, but I can only speak to my own experiences, and those have largely been positive. There are exceptions, but they are minimal. Now, this right here is where his own lived experience is clashing pretty significantly with the broader anti-left narrative that people expect from him. Like, you see him on Friday Night Tights, you see him with Geeks and Gamers, you see him in those circles. And that's kind of what we expected from Eric July. Even I would expect that from Eric July. And look, I'm not saying that this absolves him from any sort of bad faith commentary he's done in the past. I'm just saying this really is a step in a different direction for him. Because if his interactions with industry professionals have been overwhelmingly positive, respectful, and even supportive, then clearly the story is more complicated than the left runs comics and hates everybody who disagrees with them. That's not the tea. It's not the narrative. And that does not mean politics fucking disappear. It does not mean there's no bias. I want to reiterate this. But it does not mean that everyone is sincere. I also want to say that. But it does mean the picture is a lot less dramatic than the outrage ecosystem likes to present. So all these people who are supposed to be ideological oppressors, but instead they're normal, respectful, rooting for your success. That's really interesting that that's happening now, that you're stepping outside of your own echo chamber. And this is exactly why so many political narratives start falling apart once somebody actually has firsthand experience. I can't tell you how many people have preconceived notions about things like drag shows and gay people. They meet me, they go to a drag show where I'm working, and they change their opinion because they actually see it. This is why representation and visibility in media is so important. A lot of the things that Eric July and his community have pushed back against actually help people become more socially exposed to something. They start to see that whatever this facade is that these guys have created doesn't actually exist. I also noticed the part where he says the only negative interaction he had came from a situation where he somewhat naively went to bat for someone else, and even then that got worked out after a conversation. That is telling, because again, that sounds less like some giant ideological blacklist and more like regular people drama, shadiness, regular conflict, and maybe some bad judgment in a specific situation. So it's not a leftist witch hunt. It's messy entertainment industry behavior. It's groundbreaking. Every field has petty people. Every field, every group of people have cliques. Every field has nonsense. That alone does not prove some grand political conspiracy. This is very important. And this here was why I wanted to make a video about this specifically, but we're going to continue because there's more here. Number 3, this may be the most controversial point because I spent most of my life as a fan outside the professional circle. Like many of you, much of the information I believed about how people were treated in the industry came from second-hand accounts. And if I'm being honest, I trusted many of those stories, especially when they confirmed things I already suspected. I even created content based on accepting some of those accounts at face value. Looking back, I'll be the first to admit that was naive. Now, here's where things get really wild, because what he's admitting here very plainly is that he trusted stories more easily when they confirmed biases that he already believed. I'm not going to mince words here. That is exactly the kind of stuff that I've said these guys are doing on social media and in videos for a very long time. And he's confirming it. This is confirmation bias, textbook confirmation bias. And to be blunt, that has been obvious in these kinds of online political and anti-woke commentary spaces for a long time, maybe since the entire time I've been doing this. Somebody tells a story that fits the worldview, everybody runs with it, no one slows down to ask questions, and suddenly a whole narrative is built before the facts are even clear. Sis, that's not just being naive, that's literally how outrage content economies function on social media. Like, yes, thank you for finally noticing that when a story already matches your worldview, you may be less skeptical than you should be. And I'm not saying he's the only one who does that. Not at all. There's a lot of people we've talked about here. But when your whole thing is criticizing everyone else, and then you admit that you were accepting some stories too easily because they validated your assumptions, yes, that is a problem. It is a big fucking problem. And this means that all of the content that Eric has made up until this point is tainted with bias. Every single video that he has made with some sort of inside story or some sort of preconceived notion or prejudgment about any community based on something he heard from somebody else, it is all tainted with bias, and he is admitting it here in this tweet. Over time, I've had long conversations with people inside the industry, some who were close to the situations and individuals involved in exits. Many of these conversations were people trying to address statements I've made in the past, which I actually respect. According to them, the narratives around some creators being pushed out in the industry for political reasons weren't always accurate. In some cases, they claim it came down to professionalism issues. In other cases, departures were voluntary. This is huge, because now he is directly admitting that some of the stories about creators supposedly being pushed out for political reasons may not have been true, or at least might not have been the complete story, not the whole story, very one-sided. And that is a major problem for the kind of simplistic worldview that fuels a lot of culture war commentary. This is literally like 101 outrage content stuff, because they got pushed out because of politics. Is a very emotionally satisfying narrative, and that's where they hook you. It's clean, it's dramatic, it's very easy to weaponize. We've seen it here on YouTube, we've seen it on social media. Once somebody says something and everybody starts picking it up, it just becomes normal to make video after video after a video about it. It makes your side look persecuted and the other side look, for lack of a better term, evil. But real life is often not that neat. Not every "they canceled me for my belief" story is real. And we know this. Sometimes people are difficult. Sometimes they're unprofessional. Sometimes they leave on their own. Sometimes the story sounds a lot less sexy once content shows up. And I need people to really hear what he is saying here, because some of these stories that help build the broader anti-industry narrative may have been exaggerated, incomplete, misrepresented, or an outright lie. And he's admitting it here in this section. Now, those people could be wrong or even lying. Absolutely, that's always possible. But what I've ultimately realized is that without clear receipts or firsthand knowledge, it's difficult to conclusively accept one version of events. And this is where I'm like, okay, this is actually a correct standard. This should be your standard. Without clear receipts or firsthand knowledge, you should not be overly confident in any sort of sweeping narrative that you hear along the way. The issue, of course, is that the standard should have been applied from the beginning. Before he started making all the videos he's been making over the last few years, this should have been the standard. And this is exactly what I've asked from the beginning of my channel, is that these guys need to slow down, double check, bring receipts, do your homework. This is all I've asked for. And this is why this tweet stands out so much, because it sounds like someone realizing that the old level of certainty was not really justified. So now we want receipts. Now we want firsthand knowledge. Beautiful. Love that for you. Where was that energy before? Because a lot of people built entire audiences off of not having that level of caution or accountability. And we know them, we see them, and I've mentioned a few of them in this video. And Eric is a prime example of that. Let's continue. So at this point, I'm far more cautious about taking claims at face value, no matter who they come from. The truth is that the comic book industry, like any other industry, is complex. There are good people, difficult people, politics, opportunities, and misunderstandings. What I can say for certain is that building the Rippaverse has allowed me to see far more of that complexity than I ever could from the outside looking in. Sorry about that. And the perspective has changed a lot for me. And really, this is the whole tweet in a nutshell. He's not saying he's changed sides. He's not saying the left was right. He's not saying politics do not exist in comics. He's not even saying that bias is fake, which I'm glad he didn't, because clearly he is a product of confirmation bias, and he's admitting that here. But what he is saying is that the most simplistic narrative he once leaned on does not hold up as clearly or cleanly anymore now that he is seeing real world experience from this. And frankly, that's probably true. The world gets a lot more complicated once you stop interacting with it primarily through secondhand outrage. My goodness, if the rest of the people in his space could actually have this realization, that would be fantastic. It's almost like reality is more nuanced than a crazy outrage thumbnail with somebody making the face and the word woke in giant red letters. And no, this doesn't make him a liberal now. I don't want anybody to freak out about that, but it does make him sound a lot less rigid and chuddy and grifty and less cartoonish than before. And from my perspective, as a gay person, as somebody who is liberal, somebody that's criticized Eric July before, what jumps out to me is a lot of conservatives and anti-woke commentators spend years villainizing the left like it's one giant coordinated machine full of hateful, intolerant zealots. Like you always hear, the tolerant left. It's one of the things they always like to throw in our faces. And then once they actually have sustained interaction with real people in real spaces and realize, oh, some of these people are annoying, but some are cool, some are petty, but some are supportive, some are political, some are just trying to do their jobs. In other words, they are real people. Now that might sound obvious to a lot of you guys, but apparently it's not in the space that Eric July was in before. And I've noticed he's not been interacting with the people that he typically did as much as he did before. He still goes around and does that, but not as much as he did before. So overall, I do think this tweet shows a real shift. Not a full ideological conversion, it's not apology at all, but definitely a shift in tone, a shift in what he thought he was certain about, a shift in how he talks about the industry and the people that are in it. He still believes there's left-wing bias and clearly has his own political views, but now he seems much less willing to just flatten everything into some sort of outrage, persecution narrative. And honestly, I think this is much healthier and it's probably more accurate. Definitely sounds more like someone who has to engage with reality beyond internet discourse, which is very healthy. So let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think Eric July is genuinely evolving here? Do you think this is mostly business? It's business decisions here? Do you think it's both? I don't even know anymore. I'm not saying I trust him and I'm going to stop looking at his content to see what he's doing, but the proof is in the pudding. We're going to see what kind of content he continues to put out, and if this tweet actually is a reflection of the values that he held before versus the values that he has now. I think it's going to be really interesting, but let me know in the comments below. Thanks, guys.